Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, like most democratically elected leaders, faces fierce criticism for his government's policies and actions. But unlike other democratic leaders, he recently censored the internet so people in India couldn't watch a documentary that painted him in a bad light. It's not the first time for such anti-democratic practices. In fact, some now classify India as only, quote, partly free or as an electoral autocracy. With us now on whether India is headed in the right or wrong direction, let's welcome, in New Delhi, India, Shekhar Gupta, founder and editor-in-chief of The Print. In Charlottesville, Virginia, Neethi Nair, author of Hurt Sentiments, Secularism, and Belonging in South Asia. She's also an associate professor of history at the University of Virginia. In our nation's capital, Vivek Duhejia, associate professor of economics at Carleton University. And here in our studio, Sanjay Ruparelia, the Jarislowsky Democracy Chair and Associate Professor of Politics at Toronto Metropolitan University. And it's great to have you four on our program. Sanjay, you here in our studio, and our three other guests and Points Beyond for our discussion about what's happening in India these days. And let's just set this up with a little fact file off the top here. I'll ask our director, Sheldon Osman, to bring up this graphic. Here's how India's democracy stacks up. In the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, which looks at civil liberties, pluralism, political culture, participation, etc., India's global ranking has fallen from 27th in 2014 to 46th last year. In the Freedom in the World report, which rates political and civil freedoms for 162 countries, India's rating was 66 last year. That's a number. That's not a ranking, incidentally. The number is 66. So it was 66 last year, but that is down from 71 in the year 2020. And India, as we suggested, was classified as free, a free country in 2014, but it has now been classified as partly free. And according to Access Now, that's a New York-based advocacy group that tracks internet freedom, India imposed the highest number of shutdowns globally last year. Of 187 internet shutdowns recorded worldwide, 84 out of 187 took place in India. Neethi, let me get you in here to start this off. There was this documentary released by the BBC recently on Prime Minister Modi that was censored in India. Give us some of the background there. Why was it censored?
Well, I recently managed to watch it in the United States, and it's a two-episode documentary. The first one deals with Narendra Modi's tenure when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, a state in Western India, and the second episode with his ongoing tenure as Prime Minister since 2014. And I would say that although the events covered in the documentary are very well known to watchers and observers of Indian politics, it is still quite a shock to have so much evidence of Modi's unwillingness to control hate speech and violence against religious minorities in India telescoped into the space of 2 hours. And I think it reflects quite poorly on a leader described by the BBC as a man who got things done and as a powerful, influential figure.
And just a quick follow-up, the BBC offices in New Delhi were subsequently raided. What was that about?
So I think the timing it's a giveaway, right? I think that it was assigned to other foreign news organizations to watch what they broadcast. It was a way of intimidating other news organizations.
Well, let's follow up on that with Shekhar. More internet shutdowns in India than in any other country in the world last year. What's happening there? How come?
Well, I think what's happened in this case is that the power to shut down internet has really devolved. It's devolved right down to district police chiefs. And the sanctity that internet should have, that's not been accepted or that's not been evangelized to the establishment in general. So switching off internet is like imposing restrictions on people getting together. So at the slightest pretext or slightest concern about any civil violence or protest, etc., you don't have to go to any authorities higher up to have an internet shutdown authorized. It's really done at the lowest level of the, not the lowest, but at the functional cutting edge level of the law enforcement authorities. So any police captain in any district, I don't know what you call them in Canada, can just do it. So once this power is available, it's used quite freely and quite liberally. And I don't believe that it's seen as something which has a lot of stigma, or which is something that then somebody might have to explain to the courts. It's odd, but it's a reality.
Well, that begs a quick follow-up for you as well, which is you're a working journalist in India. How worried are you about your safety or your ability to do your job these days?
Look, I've been a journalist in India for more than 40 years. I became a full-time journalist with a salary in 1977. That's 46 years back. I had freelanced as a student before that. So, I've been around for 43, 44 years. It's not correct for me today to say that I am concerned about my safety or about what might happen to me, because that will set a very bad example for thousands and thousands of very bright, young, idealistic young people who are doing journalism in India. So I must always have a brave face, and I must always have a thick skin, and I must always say that I shall do my job, and I should be able to do my job as well as I can. Because I can't feel sorry for myself, and I can't ask people to start feel sorry for me. I've just been around too long, and journalism has given me far too much in my country.
Well, may you continue to be around for much longer to do your job the way you see fit. That's good to hear. Sanjay, just again, a little more background here. In 2019, there was a lot of controversy around the so-called Citizenship Amendment Act. What was that all about?
So on the face of it, this was an act that was to amend the Citizenship Act of India as a humanitarian gesture to give a pathway to citizenship for religious minorities facing persecution in 3 countries, in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. But it was, the bill and the act was only meant for certain religious minorities, Sikhs, Jains, Parsis. It excluded Muslims. And so there was a lot of criticism that it was violating the Constitution. Article 14 of the Constitution is equality before the law, irrespective of religion. India has a secular constitution, and this was seen as a strike against that.
Where does it stand now?
Well, because of the pandemic, the rules to implement the act are still being framed. So it's still not operational on the ground. But the act has been passed in Parliament by both houses of Parliament. It received the support of a number of other parties. It was very controversial because in the northeast of the country, in the state of Assam, it was also was a process in which there was a national citizenship register, in which up to 2 million residents were not on the list, so therefore didn't have rights. And so it's a combination of this national register of citizens with the Citizenship Amendment Act that a lot of critics and opponents have been really worried about, what it would mean to disenfranchise potentially millions of people.
Okay, Vivek, I've got you batting cleanup here because we wanted to get these examples, the BBC documentary, the internet shutdowns, the Citizenship Act. We wanted to get all that on the record and then have you come in and basically tell us, given what you've just heard, what do we conclude about whether Prime Minister Modi is in fact governing in the way that one would expect the leader of a democracy to govern in? What do you say?
Well, I would have to say, Steve, that we need to take a long view of this, of democracy in India. And it's not that, the story starts with Mr. Modi. Go back to 1947, many people believed India wouldn't survive as a democracy. Churchill famously thought India would collapse and implode and couldn't govern itself. And yet India has had election after election, every election bigger than the last. Everyone is a feast of democracy. So clearly India's gotten that right, elections right. Now what happens in between elections, that's a different matter. I would say on this notion of electoral autocracy, there's a bigger point here, Steve, which is that our Westminster system, unfortunately, for good or ill, is prone to majorities in Parliament essentially being able to do what they want within the limits of a constitution, a Supreme Court oversight, and so forth. So this problem of a strong majority in Parliament, meaning you can pretty much do what you want, is not unique to India. We've seen it in Canada, we've seen it in the UK. So I take somewhat exception to the notion that this is sort of a problem unique to India or to Mr. Modi.
All right, I got to get the guy with the Democracy Forum to come in on that. What do you conclude about the way Modi is governing? Is it consistent with how one would expect a democratic leader to govern?
Well, I think, Vivek is absolutely right that we should look at one side of the ledger, which is the elections. In the 2019 and 2014 election before that, more people voted in India than ever before, roughly 66% of the electorate. For the first time, you had parity of men and women voting. There was even a higher turnout amongst those who belong to the Dalits and Adivasi communities in India. So there's a great deal of vibrancy in the electoral space. But on the other hand, what we've seen in India, and I think it's true, we should put it in comparative context, we've seen across the world democratic backsliding, south of the border, of course, Brazil, Hungary, Turkey. In Britain, we've seen the rise of the far right in many countries. So what we're seeing is increasing majoritarianism in our politics, more resurgent nationalism, a more exclusionary understanding of who's a citizen. And that has happened in India. And I think we could have a debate about this or a discussion about this. I do think what's happened in India has been quite striking. There's been a real concentration of power in the hands of the Prime Minister's office. The cabinet and parliament are much weaker than they used to be. India had coalition governments for 25 years. There's a lot more power sharing. And so I do think that something has happened in India which is quite striking. It's not unique to India, but because it's the world's largest democracy, because it is an emerging power, it matters more in the world. And I think that's why a lot of people have drawn attention to it.
Shekhar, I should get you on the same question. What do you think?
Well, yes, there's a trend. There's a worldwide trend. If you look at the state of the world, you can go clockwise or anti-clockwise. I used to say it more emphatically until a couple of years back, and I said, look, go either any which way. You will see. If you go clockwise, you see Trump. Then you see Putin, Xi Jinping, Shinzo Abe, Narendra Modi, Erdogan, Netanyahu, and Orban and Bolsonaro. And when you got bored, there was always Duterte, right? Now some of those have gone. Trump has gone, a couple of the others. Netanyahu has gone and come back. But generally, the trend right now is that in elected democracies, where genuine elections take place, I'm not talking about, say, in this case, about China or Russia, them included though, there is a trend that strong men of the nationalist right are taking power. And people seem to like them. I mean, look at the polls that are coming out of Turkey right now. It looks like Bolsonaro will win quite easily. I mean, how can somebody win when your inflation is running at 80%? And
sorry, that's Brazil, not Turkey, right?
No, it's Turkey.
You said Bolsonaro.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I should have said Erdogan. Sorry.
Erdogan, okay.
My bad. Erdogan. Two of a type, right? One lost his power. The other one's going to get it back, it looks like. There's been so much criticism of the way he's handled the earthquake. So there is a certain sex appeal. There's a certain oomph to strong men of the nationalist right. And that's true of so many democracies. It's like a global trend. And there, while it's true that there's a vibrant democracy, a lot more people come out to vote. And if you took this right away from them, people will protest and they'll be held to pay. But within that, the appreciation or the value attached to what freedoms people should get, what is it that the Constitution promises you? Do you get it? Do you not get it? That understanding, I would say, with great humility, is quite poor at popular levels. And that's why it's difficult. It's been so difficult to build public opinion for anybody on these grounds. And when it comes to the opposition, the fact is that they've done on a much smaller scale, obviously because they never had this kind of power, some of the very similar things. As we speak right now, you asked a question about the raid on the BBC. In the state of Kerala, which is run by the left, which a lot of people now think is very good, it's a left-front government, a Communist Party of India Marxist government. They've just raided the studio and headquarters of a channel called Asianet. because they didn't like something that they did. So there isn't, who's going to stand up to what's going on? It can only be somebody who hasn't done the same things before. Look at the state of West Bengal. West Bengal, again, run by an opposition party. They raided a Congress person's home the night before. It was truly a midnight knot. Picked him up because he said something rude about the chief minister. So this is a contagion. And the reason those who are concerned about this are not able to find traction in public opinion is that there's always the defense from the other side saying that, look, everybody is doing it. Show us who's not doing it. So if they do it, it's all right. If we do it, it's bad. So that is where this debate is lost. And that's where the battle for public opinion is being lost. So there is one world of op-edists, people like us, the pundits, the op-edists. There is another world of the voter. And there is a big disconnect there.
Well, this is why we need a historian to put all this into perspective. And thankfully, Neethi, that's your job here today on our program. Can you tell us whether or not you see democracy being practiced in a way that is as concerning as, say, when Indira Gandhi was prime minister in the 60s, 70s, and 80s? Make that comparison, if you would, because obviously everything's got to be put into perspective here.
Right. Thank you for that question. So, it's often the current dispensation is often referred to as having an undeclared emergency. And I think there's a real distinction to be made here between what happened at the time of Indira Gandhi and what is happening now with Narendra Modi. In the time of Indira Gandhi, she was deeply tied, I would say, to her insecurities as a leader who could hold her own against her opponent at the time, a Gandhian socialist named Jayaprakash Narayan, and her inability to control the ambitions of her younger son, Sanjay Gandhi. The present government is deeply tied to the project of creating a Hindu Rashtra, or a Hindu state. And I'd like to sort of rely on this quote by the political theorist Sudipto Kaviraj. He wrote this piece in the Economic and Political Weekly in the late 1980s, where he said that Indira Gandhi's tenure represented a, quote, massive decline of ideology, of the devaluation of political speech, a use of discourse for purposes utterly inimical to the purposes of discourses, close quote. And I think we really are seeing the same thing happening now. And this is why student activists who speak of love and peace are accused of disturbing the peace and booked under criminal law. And, in similar ways, both Indira Gandhi during the emergency and Modi government now are clamping down on the foreign press. But to fully understand the magnitude of the ongoing transformation in India, I think we need to shift our focus to the ends rather than the means of politics. And I think the ambition of creating a Hindu state is an ambition of extraordinary proportions and consequences. And that is what we really need to, see.
Okay, let me follow up on that. Is that to suggest that we need to sort of cut Prime Minister Modi a little bit of slack here? Because the greater vision, if I hear you properly, the greater vision is what's really important here, not these little democratic deficiencies in the interim. Am I hearing that right?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is that the hate speech currently, the violence against religious minorities is all building up to create a Hindu state. So the democratic backsliding is not just another episode in India's history. It has a very different goal. And it has been a consistent goal of the Hindu right for 75 years and of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, to which the Prime Minister belonged for several decades, for close to a century. Gotcha.
All right. Vivek, let me get you in here and let's do some more comparing and contrasting. And this time, India and Canada, both Westminster-style parliamentary systems. What are the checks and balances in each, in your view?
Couple of things, Steve. And one fact which is interesting is that, at least on paper, although I would say not so much in practice, India in some ways is actually more democratic than Canada. In Canada, our upper house is appointed, our head of state is appointed, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet appoint members of the Supreme Court. So really, the Prime Minister of Canada, within constitutional limits, has pretty much unlimited power to do what he or she wants, unchecked by the Senate or by the Governor General. The last Governor General who opposed the Prime Minister was Lord Byng, and that was a long time ago. In India, at least in principle, you have an indirectly elected upper house of parliament, which is elected by the state assemblies. You have a president elected by an electoral college of both houses of parliament, all the state assemblies. And if you think back to the early days, 2014, 2015, when Mr. Modi was not nearly as secure as he is now, he faced some major defeats because the upper house, for example, wouldn't pass his land acquisition bill, and the government gave up on that. One other point I'd make, Stephen, in this regard is that while institutions now have been hollowed out, Mrs. Gandhi began that process. And so while it's true that her aims were quite different than Mr. Modi's, she left hollowed out and decayed institutions that were ready to be grasped by someone with a very different agenda. And I think there is a lot of blame that attaches to the Congress Party, to Mrs. Gandhi, and the current Congress leadership, dynastic as it is, has failed to actually be a convincing opposition. I'll say one more thing, that in India still, popular protest, civil disobedience, going back to the time of Gandhi, that was the inspiration, plays a role. The farmer protests that jammed up Delhi and the highways leading to it for more than a year. The government finally blinked on the farm bill, farm reforms, which many economists, by the way, supported, including me, saying this is a good reform. They said, well, look, we will heed the voice of the people. This is clearly unpopular. We haven't thought it through well enough. Let's put it on the back burner. So, there is some nuance in the picture, Steve.
Understood. Sanjay, I want to get you back in here and we've got to put some numbers on the table here. 1.4 billion people, 28 states, 8 union territories, 22 official languages. This is the 7th largest country in the area, in the world rather, by area. Is it the world's toughest democracy to govern?
It has to be one of the hardest. I think when you look at the number of faiths in India, if you look at the population, if you look at starting in 1947, of course, this was when India was its first elections. Most of the voters were illiterate, so they had to have all kinds of innovations in the electoral rolls in order to allow people to vote. So it's a remarkable democracy historically. Is it the hardest to govern? Brazil is probably a very hard place to govern. Nigeria today, we just saw an election last week, is a hard place to govern as well. Much more violence in some ways than what we've seen in India, with the less growth that India's had in the last 3 decades. So India is a remarkably difficult place to govern. I think it takes extraordinary political skill to govern it. And then the question becomes, how do you govern it well? So that's the big debate. It's a long-standing question in Indian politics. Do you govern the country better if you centralize power, if you have a strong national party, or is it a country that looks a lot messier, but is it governed better when you have a lot more power sharing, negotiation, compromise? There's horse trading involved through coalition governments. And so India's sort of seen both. And I think that's what's interesting to look back on. I think if we look at it today, the Prime Minister today was elected because there was an expectation that a more central, powerful leader would be able to push through lots of reforms. But as Vivek was just saying, some issues you can't get through because there are lots of checks and balances. So, I think it's a race I don't know how many countries are in, but it's certainly one of the most challenging places to govern. And Indian politicians who last do have extraordinary skill in building those coalitions.
Vivek, maybe I can get you to follow up on that. Is the job of being the Prime Minister of India today simply too tough, given all those realities I just put on the record?
It's a very tough job, Steve. And I would say that, as we just heard from Sanjay, one fact I forgot to mention that actually is true in both Canada and India is that we are both federal states. And so there are and so India has this great tradition of strong regional parties, regional leaders who are not from the national parties, mostly in the East and the South. And these governments, they're not perfect and they have their own deficiencies. They do push back against overreach from the center. And so the GST, I was on the ground when that was all being hammered out, that required enormous compromise between the union government, all of the states, to reach some agreement on how this new tax this new national tax would work. So, so the fact that India is federal and the BJP, yes, it wins state elections, but there are places where they simply have no foothold or have a very tiny foothold. And these are important in the overall fabric of democracy in India, Steve, I believe. And also, yes, makes the job much more challenging.
Well, to be sure, he's running into controversies. I'm talking about the Prime Minister now at every turn. And despite all the criticism leveled at him, Neethi, maybe I can get you to weigh in on this. He remains a relatively very popular leader. How come?
So I think Modi is still regarded as someone who made it to the top political position on his own steam without the support of a famous last name. But that's not to say that he didn't have the enormous support of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh and the entire Hindu right machinery. His own narrative of very humble origins, of his lower caste status, has a strong appeal. But I have to say he's also the product of a very sophisticated PR and marketing strategy. And the fact is that almost every government scheme in India today, from LPG cylinders to COVID vaccine certificates, bears his name and his photograph. It's also often said that his regime has seen massive improvements in infrastructure, in the building of roads and bridges. And while all of that is true, I think focusing on that alone takes away from the mounting hatred against religious minorities that is also characteristic of his regime.
Sanjay, how does the Indian diaspora, to the extent it speaks with one voice here in Canada, how do they regard Modi?
Well, as you said, they don't speak with one voice. So he's very popular among some elements of the diaspora for a variety of reasons. Some of the ones that Neethi's just mentioned, they sort of see this as somebody who's come from very humble beginnings to reach the pinnacle of power in India. Many support him because they see him as a bold, decisive leader. Sometimes that decisiveness has led to economically, how should we say, adverse consequences. He implemented what was called demonetization in 2016, removed 86% of the currency overnight. India is still reeling from that and from that decision because it had terrible effects in the economy in terms of the informal sector. The diaspora, so there are many here who would support him. There are many who are also worried and concerned about some of the things that Neethi's been talking about, right?
What's the ratio, do you think?
It's hard to tell. We don't have a survey. It's interesting. There was a very interesting survey done just last year by YouGov and some colleagues down at the Carnegie Endowment in DC, where they looked at how did the Indian diaspora view our parties. Whom do they support? So traditionally, the Liberal Party is the main beneficiary of Indo-Canadian vote. The new generation, voters under 30, are much more prone to voting for the NDP. That could be because of Jagmeet Singh. It could be because they're more left of center. We haven't done a survey yet of how the Indian diaspora here systematically thinks about the different parties in India. My sense is it's going to be quite split. There's going to be a lot of support for Mr. Modi. He came to Toronto in 2015. There was a really big turnout like there was in Houston when he visited, when he joined a rally with Donald Trump in the United States. There are lots of opponents and critics as well because they're concerned about the direction the country is going in terms of its social fabric, in terms of communal policies, some of these acts we've been talking about. So it is like India. You have to remember one thing that's very important to see. Mr. Modi and the BJP is the dominant party in India now in a way that the Congress was in the 50s and 60s. It still receives less than 40% of the vote nationally. And as Vivek was saying, it's the first past-the-post system that creates these manufactured majorities. So it has a big seat majority in parliament, but when it comes to the popular vote, it's still 40% across the country. It's much higher in certain segments of the country, the north and the west, now into the northeast. But in the south of the country, for instance, the BJP outside of the state of Karnataka has a really difficult time making inroads.
Shekhar, I wonder the issues that we have highlighted today, how much, in your view, do you think they diminish India's standing in the world today?
Well, how do I answer that? It depends on how does today's world determine the standing of any nation, and who does that determining. So these are complex issues. Having said that, I'll take you back to a couple of things that have been discussed before. I think Vivek said that it was because of public pressure and public protest that Modi government withdrew the farm bills, which he supported and which I supported. because I thought that was a very useful reform. The fact is that that is not the only thing he has withdrawn because of public protests. The CAA also is very much a result of the deferral, because now this is now almost like an indefinite deferral, because anytime you ask the government, they'd say, oh, because COVID is still not yet over. So maybe unless they issue a notification, a gazette notification saying COVID's over, which will never happen, it's not going to happen. And even if it does, it is lit up again a little bit before the elections. They now have other concerns. They have domestic concerns, because CAA by itself maybe is an issue of political correctness. You can say, all right, in principle, you cannot make that distinction. But the other principle is that if it's only about people in India's neighboring countries, then Muslims have homes of their own. That's Pakistan and Bangladesh. Pakistan was created for Muslims. So if any Muslim feels aggrieved, why should India give them citizenship? So that's the argument from one side. But what doesn't work is what is being tried in the Northeast. Northeast is very important for the BJP, which is to say that we already have a national register of citizens process, which has identified who are the people who we think are not Indian citizens. And this is going back to 1971, that is 52 years. It so turned out that of the 2 million identified, a vast majority are Hindus. Now, is the BJP government going to turn the Hindus out, or are they going to disenfranchise the Hindus? That's why this NRC and the exception was thought of, that in the Northeast, where these people have been identified, Hindus will be accommodated and given Indian citizenship, while the Muslims will be told, if not to leave the country, but at least to be denied their voting rights. That is not what the people of the Northeast want, because people of the Northeast are not just fighting on the Hindu-Muslim basis, they are also fighting for linguistic protections, for ethnic protections, for their own identity. And that's where the BJP ran into big trouble, because they didn't quite appreciate the complexities of Indian society. And the other thing that happened that I think is not adequately understood is the pushback that they got from the Gulf countries. Now, Mr. Modi lays great store by his relationship and India's relationship with Gulf countries. He's got the topmost national honors from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, I think Indonesia as well. And he talks about it in his public speeches, because that's his way of saying, see, these Muslim nations hold me in such high regard. And also, India's strategic interest, the balancing of Pakistan, the reaching out to the old friends and patrons of Pakistan is all part of his politics. So he's responded to all that. He's been forced to respond to all that. And that's why CAA has rules under CAA have not yet been notified. So this is his third big retreat. The first big retreat, as Vivek said, was the land acquisition bill. If he so wanted, he could have called a joint session of the two houses and still passed it. But he did not, because he knew that that will be problematic. And Rahul Gandhi had attacked him by calling him a pro-rich government, by saying "Suit boot ki sarkar," that you are a suited booted government. That's a metaphor to say you are rich people's government. So he pulled back. Second time was the farm bills. And third time is CAA NRC. Now, the other thing that we missed out in the middle is that during the pandemic, as part of the pandemic reform, don't waste a crisis mindset, he again brought in some reforms which people like me supported. That is the new labor codes. Those new labor codes have also been now sort of deferred and left to the state. So it's not as if he does not respond. He's not so powerful that he can afford to not bother about public opinion. To bring you back to the initial question you raised, it is also the failure of those who stand for civil liberties, or who stand for, it's their failure to convince the critical mass of Indians that it's a cheap thing to deny people their civil liberties. So this is politics in progress. In certain areas, one side is winning.
Sanjay, let me try this with you. To what extent do you think Western countries, the United States, Canada, et cetera, rely on India to meet their own geopolitical goals?
It's an important question today. I mean, as we know, the number one concern for Canada, the United States, many Western countries. Oh, I suppose there's two questions right now. One is, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Second is the perceived growing threat from China to some of the values and interests of the West. So India's become a critical partner, as the phrase that's used in our new Indo-Pacific strategy. The U.S. has, for many administrations, since the Clinton administration, through the Trump, through the Bush, Obama, and now the Biden administration, increased its support for India's ambitions in the international stage. And that's from its growing economic partnership, defense ties, new critical technologies. Every few months, you'll see some major, new reform take place. I think it's the case that in Canada, too, there's a real desire to buttress our relations with India. They're actually quite thin, given the fact that the diaspora here is so big. I mean, I think today, the latest reports that we saw were that Indian immigrants are the largest growing sector of our immigrant population in Canada. I think it's roughly 20% last year was the report that I saw.
Do you think that's a hangover from the Cold War? Because once upon a time, the West was certainly militarily closer with Pakistan than India, and India was considered to be in the camp of the Soviets.
Absolutely. And it's still, of course, India and Russia still have very strong ties, certainly in the defense sector. It's something that's been quite controversial during the war in Ukraine. India has tried to play a bridging or a balancing role in this. It shifted slowly over time. It took quite some time before it censured Putin, saying that this was not the time for war, as Prime Minister Modi said. But it has not joined sanctions. In fact, it's taken discounted oil from Russia. So India is actually a very complicated country, as you can imagine. It is the world's largest democracy. It has growing ties with the United States, with the European Union. Canada is trying to increase its ties, although it's been struggling. 6 rounds of bilateral negotiations for a new free trade pact, even an early precursor to a free trade pact. It's difficult to negotiate with India because it's an unusual country. On the one hand, it's an advanced economy when it comes to services and IT. On the other hand, as we discussed in the show, for instance, the Farm Bill, still 50% of the population requires on agriculture. So India has always been reluctant to open up its agricultural sector in WTO negotiations. So I would say that its star, in fact, is rising. It's becoming the pivotal country for many Western countries who are concerned about China. And so this is a good question to think about historically. When we think of rising powers, rising powers tend to be sort of amongst the leaders in terms of economic modernization of their era. And India and China, in some sectors, are world-beating. But in per capita terms, China is still a middle-income country. India is still a low-middle-income country. And that's why you see a lot of the stresses that happen, for instance, in climate change negotiations. They'll say, yes, we have got to do our bit, but climate change is the responsibility of the advanced industrialized West. So you can't impose the same burdens on us. We have common but differentiated responsibilities. In trade negotiations, you see something similar. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, India is slowly decoupling from Russia. But it's going to take a long time because it still requires Russian arms because it's facing China on the border. And at the same time, it's actually deepened its economic relationships with China. So that's how complicated it is. And I think that's something that here in Canada we have to understand better, talk about more. And I think in that sense, the new Indo-Pacific strategy is a really important advent in our foreign policy because I think Canada needs to be more engaged in the region. It needs more people talking about what's happening in these countries. And then we need to hear more about the perspectives from India, from other countries, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Indonesia, that we're trying to build growing ties with. And I think that will actually probably enrich our discussion and have more nuanced diplomacy.
And that is our time. I want to thank the 4 of you for coming on to TVO tonight and shining some light on the world's largest democracy. Many thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.